Hello there, welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of Drycha of the Wood Elves. I played through the initial turns and got a real feel for the faction, its strengths, its weaknesses. I'll talk about those in this video and give you some army compositions later on. Like always, this is not an in-depth guide, but will give you a lot of information to play the faction. So let's play with Drycha of the Wood Elves. So for your short victory, you need to maintain control of 5 settlements, and these are all outside of your area. These are all in Athelloren. So of course you can either own them or through vassals and military allies, but for a more thematic campaign I always recommend that you go over there and you conquer them. Now, you also need to occupy Loot Razor Sec 30 different settlements. Achieving this, it will give you +3 hero capacity for all heroes. Like always, it's good to ensure that you get a good amount of heroes early on without spending too much on pilgrims. Now, long campaign victory. Of course, you need to achieve the short campaign victory. You need to occupy Loot Razor Sec 70 different settlements. You need to win the Battle of the Defense of the Wook. This happens with the Ritual of Rebirth. Then you need to perform the Ritual of Rebirth and to perform 8 rituals of World Roots Healing. So that is basically this. So the more you go into the mechanics, here you have to perform 8 of those, so basically in 8 of these trees. That's basically what happens. Now, achieving this, it will give you +10 hero recruit rank, of course, very useful typically to ensure that your caster heroes especially, they all have the, a little bit of variety in their spells, or that the melee heroes are much better, or have their close innate abilities, etc. Drycha, she leads the Dryads of Dispathy. So, what she gets is quite interesting. So, she has reduced diplomatic relations with Wood Elves. She has reduced upkeep for all Dryad, Treekin, and Treeman units, and increased upkeep for all Elf units. You also start with 1 Ember. This is really good. It helps her get into a specific sort of playthrough. I'll go in a moment. And then all Elf units are Glamoured, reducing their combat power, making them expendable, so they do get leadership, but they get less melee attack and reload skill. It's still not enough. If it would go the other way around, it would be more significant. So giving them leadership in exchange for melee attack and reload skill, yeah, I'll do it. I'll still use Elf units. The biggest issue is actually the upkeep still. But yeah, it kind of leads you into a different playstyle, which is always nice. Now, in terms of climates, there's no climate. There's no issue. You can go anywhere, you can conquer everywhere. That's precisely one of the best reasons to play the Wood Elves, actually. So, contrary to other elf factions, such as the High Elves or the Dark Elves, the Wood Elves don't have any issues with climate, which is so good. So, you start in the Griffin Wood, a very key location, very difficult to control. You're surrounded and enemies will declare very soon, so be wary, persevere, It's gonna be a tough campaign. Now, typical expansion is then to control the nearby lands, of course, especially considering the mechanics. I'll speak about them in a moment. And then you have to go into Athelloren for the objectives, so it's a bit less sandbox driven than other Wood Elves with lots of choices. But yeah, I cannot go really into typical expansion here, because with the Wood Elves you can just decide to expand to different trees if you wish to catch up, something. But by all means, let's say that a typical expansion would be to control the initial area, then perhaps move on to the Forest of Gloom down here before going to the Oak of Ages just to gain more territory, or maybe you're gonna go into Laurelland Forest, it's up to you, or straight up to the Oak of Ages, whatever. The typical expansion is nearly always, that's the one thing that I can say, nearly always to just go through into the regular area, around your tree, and then you decide. So in terms of diplomacy, it's rather complex. So most of them are actually quite your foes, and even your own Wood Elves are your enemies. So greenskins, dwarfs, ogres, Kislev, vampire counts, they're all near you, and they have quite a lot of aversion towards you. You can see there, for instance, they do have 40 aversion. That's kind of like the minimum that I've found, except with the Empire factions. So you can see here, for instance, that they only have 10 aversion. So of course I've been fighting against Ostermark and I defeated him, and that will create issues, but still the Empire might be your biggest ally if you can embrace it. So going on a campaign versus the enemies of the Empire, you know, you're gonna fight the vampire counts, you're gonna fight the ogres, you're gonna fight the greenskins, so that may help out solidify your status as their friend, and perhaps good status within Bretonnia. Therefore, outputs with Empire and Bretonnia are not out of the way, and you should embrace their artillery or cavalry possibilities. Typical enemies will then be greenskins, dwarves, chaos, Norsca, vampire counts, nearly everyone that basically the Empire fights against. That's the idea here. In terms of mechanics, first and foremost, basically the trees. Everything is based around the magical forests. You need to control everything around them, you know, the settlements around the specific tree, in order to heal them, regardless of who is owning those territories. Now, this implies being at war with multiple foes and sometimes in multiple fronts. Like you may choose to go to the Witchwood, you may choose to go to the Oak of Ages, to the Forest of Gloom, and then you need to defeat the enemies around, etc. That's a big thing and thematic, quite thematic, of the Wood Elves. Now, the rituals of rebirth, what are those? Once they are healed, you can have a ritual of rebirth. So basically, once this healing has succeeded, you'll get some specific bonuses. Okay, I can get diplomatic relations with the vampire counts. And then you will be able to issue a ritual of rebirth. Once this is done, you can basically have a powerful reward, such as the construction, for instance, of this temple that gives you, now immunity to vampiric attrition. It does give awakened forest attrition, more control, hero recruit rank, etc. So basically, all of these places have those specific buildings that you will be able to, and then, you know, in accordance to what you get and how fast you get those, then you'll have different objectives, different ideas that you can have. For instance, I can get physical resistance for all my armies. That would be cool. And immune to chaos, undivided corruption, and chaos waste. So maybe I want to go over there to conquer, and I'll need this. So that sort of idea, how you approach the trees and which ones you go first, makes quite a difference. So it will steer you and have different alliances, different possibilities, etc. That's why talking diplomacy, it's really complex. So now, world roots or deep roots, what are these? So the deep roots are basically, you can teleport, you know, by having an army near your tree, and you can teleport to another tree. So you'll be able to teleport effectively. All of these are like portals, really, and you can teleport across them. There is a cooldown between uses. Everything is right here. Okay, everything is right here. Okay, so, and with that you can teleport across, and then you can focus on that tree. You know, you can send an army here to Orion's camp, sorry, not Orion's, Orion's camp, and then you can clear all the tree. Once that's completed, you can go over here to the Haunted Forest or to the Jungles of Qian. You know, that sort of idea. Okay, so it provides you quite a different replay value to every single campaign, because you'll choose different ones, and that alone will give you different bonuses. You see the idea. You know, there's a lot of possibilities with this. Now, let's talk about Ember. Ember is tied to technology. So once you heal one of those trees, you get one Ember, and then you can choose for the variety of the specific texts. They're all very powerful. For instance, I could go with more diplomatic relation with all factions. Maybe I want to go a diplomacy route next, you know, or maybe I want to go with these new units, so more physical resistance, you know, or maybe I want to go with more growth and recruitment duration, you know, maybe I want to go with more income from settlement buildings, maybe I want to go with some eternal guard units, or, you know, that sort of idea. This helps that, you know, as you're typically getting one tree, and, you know, ensuring that that's ritual rebirth is done, and then you get the Ember, then you get these texts, so it all adds up. And that's one of the most interesting parts of the Wood Elves, you know, how everything synergizes so well. You know, you have to embrace that synergy and try to focus on one path. Now, you're also one of the few that can actually build the Shrine of Cain. Most of the time you can always, you know, forego this construction idea, because all that you actually need to do is to defeat the hero with the sword. I would like for that to change, you know, for them to make them, for this to feel more like a high elf, dark elf, and wood elf mechanic, so that no one else could take the sword other than just, you know, by building the Shrine of Cain. That would make it perhaps a little bit more of a mechanic for them, instead of for everyone that can just defeat the Lord. But still, you know, you can build the shrine and you can take the sword for yourself. You can construct the shrine so that you can take the sword initially if no one has built it, you know. So then we have offices. Offices, they're different for every single faction, Wood Elf faction, so be wary of that. For instance, she gets melee attack when fighting against wood, against other elves, and weapon strength when fighting against elves, which is rather nice, you know, for that army. So you can send out Drycha against the other Wood Elves. You can have a Speaker for the Lost that gives, you know, a little bit better passive ability to elf units, so without any debuffs, which is kind of cool. You can use this guy to have some Wood Elf, elf units in your armies without having any negatives, you know. Or you can have this one for less upkeep for treemen, more melee defense for treemen units. I guess you check what kind of an army he should have based around the treemen. This one for cave bats, feral manticore, giant spiders, great hawks, giant wolves, feral bears, you know, all those extra units that you get with Drycha, which, by the way, it's what I'll embrace next. So you have all of these with Lord's army abilities. There's nothing really that gives province-wide stuff, but yeah, that's how it works. It's more to get some buffs for your armies. Now, Drycha in specific, what does she have? You do have different dryads than the typical ones. So these dryads, they actually have frenzy, you know. They do cause fear, which is nice. They're still weak to fire, you know, and they have slightly different stats, really, which is kind of cool. You know, you have not the typical dryads, you have the malevolent ones, and then you have the malevolent treemen, also with a frenzy. Then you have the malevolent tree king, also with a frenzy. So you can see how different this sort of campaign can be just because these units are malevolent, right? You know, you can recruit wild spirits. But then, that's the thing. These wild spirits, what are we talking about? We also have feral manticores. We have great hawks, which is kind of cool because you do have an armor-piercing, you know, unit over here. You know, it's like an infantry-sized armor-piercing unit, flying armor-piercing unit. It's really cool. You also have giant spiders. They also have poison attacks and armor-piercing, so they're really cool. They also have Strither, which is quite significant there. You also have feral bears. It's kind of like a cavalry of sorts. You know, you have an anti-large armor-piercing cavalry, which is nice. Then you have giant wolves. It's more of a lighter, medium cavalry, really, with good charge bonus, but not a lot of melee defense. Then you have some cave bats, similar to the typical bats from the vampire counts. So this alone allows you to have quite a vastly different army than other Wood Elves, really. So, and in addition to that, sorry, I missed that out. You can give them some improvements, similar to the mechanic from the greenskins, you know, the scrap mechanic. You can give them some aspects, and these will change them. So for instance, these will give more speed and less armor, more armor-piercing weapon damage, in deniance of some physical resistance. Maybe you want them to focus on damage, so let's go for that. Maybe the other way around. You want the aspect of the oak. They'll be slower, but their armor is better, and they have a charge defense versus large. That would be nice. You can have a front line of dryads if you wish, you know. Maybe you want the aspect of the willow, so more damage versus infantry, more melee defense, but less armor-piercing weapon damage. So it's really up to you, and every single one of them will receive different sort of scrap upgrades, okay? Based around the similarities, you know. Either you want them to be more sturdy, more damage dealing, you know, or multi-purpose. That's the sort of idea that you're gonna have, okay? So all in all, it's quite an interesting campaign here. Now there's one final one, which is Codil. So Codil, he's a specific spellcaster, actually quite a nice monster. You know, he would be nice in single combat, even without the spells. But he's a spellcaster, so tons of armor, lots of leadership, because he's actually unbreakable, decent speed, you know, he doesn't move really fast because he's a tree, but yeah, you know. Tons of melee attack and melee defense, lots of weapon strength and charge bonus. Most of this is affected because he's also getting the frenzy. Let me locate it here because in the amongst of everyone, there we go. So he does have the mixed lore of beasts and lore of dark, which is always helpful. You know, some interesting aspects there. And then he has this ability, the active ability Muster of Malevolence. He gives some damage per second to an enemy unit. Not a lot of range, actually. Do note, you know, sometimes these spells you gotta remember how much range they have. But overall, he's mainly used for his mixed spellcasting and melee abilities. In campaign, he will also give some bonuses to, guess what, other tree units, Dryads, Treekin, and Treemen. So yeah, by all means, ensure that he is together either with Drycha or on another army to get the most out of him. It's similar to other legendary heroes that can provide that level of assistance to an army. So in terms of province edicts, you really don't have any province edicts. You already have quite good bonuses really with the trees and the rituals of rebirth, and in addition all these buildings have armies in the region or all provinces effects. So kind of these buildings work as your province edicts really. Now in terms of army stances, so what you have is quite similar to some factions but then different in some others. Let me show you. So you have the world route, so you need to not have moved to this turn. I have moved, so it's not possible anymore. And of course this is basically the same as other underground stuff. It has the same tactical connotations, of course. It does have a little bit of ambush defense chance, which is great, so you know that the enemy cannot just immediately ambush you and stuff. So yeah. Now you also have encamp and raid. Okay, and they both cost 50% move points. Okay, so they typically work exactly as the others, you know, immunity to attrition, enabling replenishment, exactly. Then we have a Masterful Ambush instead of the ambush, so it only takes 10% movement range actually, and it has a reduced chance of being detected by enemies, so it's really cool that the Wood Elves of all kinds, you know, have this ability to be a little bit more sneaky. And you can play, you know, a full campaign just derived on that factor. And then, of course, you have a Forced March. That's typically it for province edicts and army stances. In terms of buildings, let's talk about it. So outside of the trees, you have almost nothing. You just have in the minor settlements, you have some minor buildings, you know, they work kind of like edicts really. You build them, then they'll give you some buffs in the either to all provinces or armies in the region really. So let's talk about the Griffin Wood here. Now, you don't have any walls, let's start with that. You have a lot of building slots, so you have to accommodate for it, and defense may be difficult. Now, so you have a specific landmark already in Griffin Wood that gives you Forced Attrition as a defensive tool, immunity to vampiric attrition, hero recruit rank increase for branch rates in all provinces, and Wildwood Ranges and Malevolent Treekin recruitment. Now, something that should be noted is precisely that sort of recruitment. Notice how it's missing something, because you don't have access to the higher tier elite troops of the High Elves, you know, either in melee, in missiles, or cavalry. It's all there. There's no elite of those. You have a somewhat reduced roster, but you can compensate with both the fact that your malevolent tree spirits are so good, and also with some, you know, some of these flying units. Of course, they are always helpful. And in addition, you also have those specific special units that I showed you with Drychas here. So you have the wild spirits. That's the word I was missing. You have the Pharaoh Manticores, you have the Great Hawks, you have the Giant Spiders, the Pharaoh Bears, Giant Wolves, and Cave Bats. So make sure you use those to complement your forces, because, well, you're kind of gonna need it. Now, in terms of full military, then it changes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings that you need for the fullest. This helps. You know, the typical problem with some of these factions with a lot requiring some of the building slots. Now this is helpful, so you don't need too many. You can maybe avoid the Glade Riders really, because, you know, you do have some better options overall. So that in itself helps out a lot. And then you have the infrastructure. It's the basic one, you know, giving income or growth and more casualty replenishment rate. Or then you can have, you know, a very ton heavy of income and still one resource production there, and just some income and a lot of some control, some growth to all provinces, which is always nice, and a lot of different products that you're going to trade with. So that's basically how you they're all overall good choices. Okay, they're really powerful, but the issue is that you can hardly build these, of course, because you can only build them in the trees, and there's quite a limit for them. That's why Athelloren is so important, because there's already several settlements there that you can use up to get a good amount of income. Now, research is really good. It gives good campaign buffs and great unit buffs as well, like specifically for great eagle units here, or you can have some armor for all elf infantry and cavalry units. Notice how this also refers some specific units that you don't have access to. That's mainly because you do have access to the regiments of renown, so that's the units that are mentioned there. You don't have the Wild Riders or Shields, but you can get the Regiment of Renown. That's the sort of idea. And then you have the, like I mentioned, the Amber ones. The Amber ones are really good, and they will be able to give you, different play styles, because you cannot get Amber that easily. We've talked about the mechanics, so you have to plan this out. In general, I would like you to really get into a campaign and just think, okay, I'm going to get this one, and I want to synergize that with that tree to overall getting a better army, or maybe you just want the extra growth and recruitment duration, that sort of idea. Just give it a little bit of thought before you start the campaign, okay? So as always, we have Lord-specific skills. We have the yellow line or caster. In this case for Drycha, she has both. Then we have the red line or army, and the blue line or campaign. Now, starting with the blue line, they do have the biggest casualty replenishment rate there is, plus 15%. This was not changed from Warhammer 2, so take the opportunity. You still have some upkeep reduction, even though it may not be necessary, really, considering the mechanics that you already have. But still, if you want to go for less reduced upkeep instead of getting more income, by the way, just by all means, just ensure that you keep an eye out, because of course you're gonna need several skill points to get Drycha really well, or any other lord really. Now, red line appears to have either mostly based around the elven units, or mostly based around the tree units, such as, for instance, I'm going here with this because of course that buffs up most of the units that I'm gonna try and get. So overall that helps you out, because you don't have a lot of units in terms of the elves, so for other Wood Elf factions it's quite an expensive line. Since you have reduced units in terms of elves, then maybe it kind of leans you over into more of a treekin sort of play style. So yeah, that's a good advantage, let's say, focusing on that style and just go embracing it, and that's it. It doesn't mean that you cannot get some archer units. By all means, you can do that, but still you may wish to just go forth more into the trees really. And then in terms of heroes, you do have some specific abilities, such as, for instance, from the Waystalkers here for more allies, base missile damage, of course. Note that this affects any ally. It doesn't just affect Wood Elves, for instance. So always remember that, especially with the outposts, because these guys are really cool to have around artillery, for instance. You can get some Empire. If you've never seen Hellstorm rocket batteries with Wood Elves with these abilities, well, you should. Especially because they also give, if not mistaken, reload time reduction. So you can imagine how that accumulates. It's really cool, really a nice idea here. And in addition, you also have the different branch rates. Let me just show you here. Yep, they still replenish troops, and you can get life, beasts, or shadows lores with them. So yep, that's definitely one of the choices that would go, for those malevolent branch rates, and then perhaps some Waystalkers to give some buffs to other units, that sort of idea. So here are the red line skills for the Wood Elves. Some key notes are all missile units, nearly one, and the division between the cheap infantry and the elite infantry, and also within the trees as well. So not the best in terms of effectiveness. So like, for instance, you don't have the Dryads together with this. That would give them tremendously good value, but still, That's how it works. So Drycha, she focuses on her 3 units, but also on her own special ones for the faction. You know, these cave bats, feral medicals, giant spiders, great hawks, giant wolves, and feral bears. So basically, combinations of those are in order. The first is quite an early army example. You know, just still embracing a few elf units if you can, without having too much issues with the upkeep. They're still good in the early game, particularly. But then you can, you know, embrace different late game ideas. You know, you're still with elves or just some hawk riders. Those are great. You can replace these guys instead with those giant those great hawks, like I'll showcase later on. So there's several possibilities here, and they're quite cheap in terms of redline skills. Now, in terms of the ancient treemen, particularly the malevolent ones, because they have different abilities, they also reinforce those new units. Therefore, you know, combinations of those are in order. This one is more embracing all of those. Notice how cheap there is in terms of redline skills. This one is still having a little bit of some Wood Elf missile units, just for flavor. Nothing wrong with going with one or the other, of course. Then we have several even more combinations of those. By all means, feel free to have your own ideas. This is just to showcase one thing too, as in when you try to get the difficult task of merging elves and trees, particularly with Drycha, notice how ineffective it becomes in terms of redline skills. So it's really difficult to try and embrace elf units and then different units of the forests as well. So this is kind of like a good combination that does it really well. This one too, with those missile hawks, basically. I can't remember the name now, but in essence, always remember that you can replace these with those great hawks and with those feral bear units. But this is just an example of how you can mix up, you know, the wood elf armies, especially among, you know, the elves and the trees. All of them will do short work of any foes that you find in the late game, particularly with all the redline skills, all the research. They're really effective in the late game. So, Drycha is quite a different campaign from other Wood Elves, and further solidifies the notion of how interesting these differences between lords are. You have different units, but using the same similar mechanics, and a different starting position alone that gives it a nice feel. And when you add diplomacy and all the options that you actually have, you have the great tools for a great experience, even if you already played Wood Elves. Now, if anything, the playstyle is rather focused around the 3 units, and it lacks a little bit of variety, as you've seen in terms of the units. This is the bit of the downside, but it's a different experience. I want you to embrace it as such. Different is always good, in my opinion, especially when it's done like this. You get different units in detriment of focusing on a more varied style, really. Now, your army, it will consist then a little bit different than other Wood Elves. Good infantry, good missiles, good cavalry, great monstrous infantry and single entities, good flyers, lacks artillery, and maybe still micro-intensive. It's still difficult to navigate all the units, really, and it's going to be a problem. But replenishment is great, especially considering no climate issues. So let's go then to fight alongside Drycha and her malevolent spirits.